or this summit is also for that. So actually, I'll be talking from my perspective as a student and as a professional, or as a professional student too. So actually, uh, I'll slide. So, talking about me, I'm a computer science or I'm a software engineering student. Along with that, I'm a community activist relating open source. That means I'm also a GitHub campus expert. I hope that all of you know about what is GitHub campus expert. If you don't know, GitHub campus expert are the student community leader, technical student community leader, whom the GitHub trains and has to grow to provide some support like events like this. Uh, Apart from that, I'm also a software development engineer at eSeva. It is one of the largest payment gateway here in Nepal. The agendas we will be talking about are, I will be just sharing about the open source philosophy. Then we'll learn about, I'll share about what actually there is on the history, how the open source get started, and how it is just contributing on these days and how it is going on. Then I'll just be sharing about what's in open source, the myths over there. We'll be talking about the licenses in open source, about FOSS, about what's beyond the open source softwares. Actually, all of you may have been listening about FOSS, that is free and open source softwares, but open source is not just all about them only. We have something else too. We'll be going beyond the FOSS. What's beyond the FOSS in open sources? Then I'll also be sharing about how one who is new to the open source can get started, because I think many professionals and students today are just very behind this. Getting introduced, we have what does actually open source mean in layman term or just in a term, non-technical term. It refers to something that people can modify and share. Maybe the modification or something that they have get, because its design is publicly open and accessible. Thing being open source means it's accessible to you and accessible to all. Then talking about open and source, it means it is contributed by you and people like you, also supported by you and people like you, and it is more about movement than other things. Open source is more about movement. Then, when you talk about open source, the first thing that comes in the mind is FOSS, or free softwares. There are open source software too, and there is a term called free softwares only too. But let's first discuss on the philosophy of free software. These philosophy are given by the great legend Richard Stallman. He have 4 freedom points that are, we can also say these are the philosophy of free softwares. It doesn't mean that these are the terms for open source software, but these are the terms that describe the free software, but not open source. The freedom to run the program as you wish. It means if you have just installed any application or any software or any hardware or something like that, you should be able to run the program as you wish. No, there are 2 points. Everyone write programs, and we write programs, but programs control us. There is a difference between you controlling to the program and the program controlling to you. That is, what is the difference between you have freedom to run the program, or you have you have just to run the program. That is the difference. So another is, freedom is about to study how the program works and change. If you want to change, how it works, the way it works, you should have freedom and you should be able to do that. So it does your computing as you wish. That point I mentioned. Whether do you want to be controlled by program or whether do you want to control to the computer program. Then you should also have access to the source code, which is the precondition for this freedom. That is freedom number. Another freedom is freedom to redistribute the copies. If you just get source from somewhere, you can redistribute that on your way. That should be freedom to you. If you want to say your software as a free software. So if you can distribute, if you have freedom to distribute, it means your neighbor can easily get it. And the freedom to distribute copies of your modified version too. For example, if you get a source from someone, you modify it according to the change, you modified and you make the changes according to you need. If you want, redistribute that, and people should be able to use that in your version. You should be able, or you should have freedom to share that one. That is another philosophy. So these are the 4 philosophies. I think you may have get about this point earlier too. Then, just talking about those 4 points about freedom, there are 2 questions that raises. These are, what impact do Stallman's 4 freedoms have on open? And another is, how is free different from open? I mentioned that these conditions or these freedom points are for free software, not for open. Then what is the difference between free and open? That is one of the discussion point. And another discussion question is, what impact do Stallman's these 4 freedoms have on open? Now, all of you may have seen this graph somewhere because this is very popular. Free software means it should be free as in free speech. That means you speak for freedom, you get freedom, and it should not be free as in beer. Means someone can buy beer for you, that's free, but that's not your freedom. That is, I don't think that is enough to discuss about because that points are confusing. So I have just simplified them. If we just get or source in the dictionary about the word free, it is really a bit ambiguous. So why it is ambiguous? It means a free beer is beer that you don't have to pay for. It means you get it free, right? And a free speech is a speech where you have the right to express your opinion. You are free. Now, how can go out of that ambiguity? So, free as in beer means it's about the price of 0. It is not bought by someone and given to you, but it is given just free to everyone. That's the point. And another point is free as in speech. That means it's about the freedom. We say it as libre. But the free as in beer, we say gratis. Then Stallman actually concludes that force should be false. That means free, libre, open source software. Right? Force means just free and open source software. Free have ambiguous meaning, so we can say it as FLOSS, FLOSS. Free LibreOffice, free libre open source software. Now let's get in the history how open source originated, what are the big points that make this movement today, and how we are getting those great systems in our hands. Actually, there were many species and there were many things about the timeline of open source. Actually, it was originated before than these points, but when you talk about the open source system, the first open source system is considered as A2 system, which was created in 1953, that was released in 1953, and then another movement was 1983 when Richard Stallman started rewrites of closed source software used. That was he was writing the open source version of GNU as a GNU. Actually, that was one of the software in that time. That was one of the operating system which was paid. and Unix based. But later he want to rewrite it so that everyone can access it for free. So he started writing his own version of code by doing reverse engineering of the softwares he used, and he thinks people really do need these softwares. And then after started writing those, Richard Stallman first created GNU, that is as a free operating system. There is difference between GNU and GNU. So what is the difference is GNU is that GNU1 which was paid, and the Richard Stallman's GNU was GNU's not Unix. GNU's not Unix. So actually that was not pure Unix, it was his own version which was free operating system. And later on 1985, Richard Stallman really write a GNU manifesto which was about asking for support in development of GNUs. He was really writing for this GNU operating system, but he don't get enough time, and he thinks that someone else can have good quality than me who can contribute to this project. So he write a GNU manifesto in which he have asked for support in development of that one. There is how collaboration started, how the ideas of multiple people came into one. And he founded Free Software Foundation. That was Free Software Foundation was founded in 1985. Then in 1980s, Stallman also created GNU General Public License, which was known as GPL, and under which that GNU operating system was released. This was where actually the open source software get started. And in 1991, there was a big moment in open source history because Linus Torvalds released Linux kernel along with the source code. Why I mentioned it was really a big moment because that GNU version of Richard Stallman was not completely open source because he was that was open sourcing, but the kernel he was using was not complete. So he should have to use from somewhere else. Then in 1991, Linus Torvalds released Linux kernel, which was later used as a kernel for the GNU OS, and the first purely and completely open source software or open source operating system, GNU, was released. So all of you may have now been able to say that GNU is a operating system, but Linux is a kernel, not an operating system. In 1953, the coining term of open source just get started due of that big moments we mentioned, and later Netscape's browser source code was released, which was the first browser. Then Apache Software Foundation, which is known as one of the largest repository for open source software today, because if you just search for some libraries or something, you may see Apache in the foreground of that. So Apache Software Foundation was formed and Gnome was also released. In 2000, OpenOffice source code released. That was OpenOffice, which was the counterpart of the Microsoft Office version. And later in 2005, Linus Torvalds released Git, and similarly Android Mobile OS, which was based on the Linux kernel, was also released. Later in 2010, the LibreOffice was forked from the OpenOffice, that was released on 2003. And from 2014, container and those orchestration tools also have been in the open source market. There are many other things in the open source history that can't be just shared here because they are really that have taken that amount of time. So now, then what is the free and open source software? I mentioned about free. Free means you should have freedom in use. Then there is a difference. Free means about freedom and open source means about quality. Because if you want to have your quality on that code, you can write your own version, you can and push and merge those so that you have your quality. Similarly, there will be quality of everyone so that Actually, open source is about quality and free software is about the freedom. Now, so open source software is a better quality and free and open source software must be free uh, according that freedom points. Open source code, not that means code should just not be public. We can't say that software is open source if just the code is public, because that code should have open source licenses. That means they should assure that you can use this in your own version or you can have changes and redistribute it. So there must be something that that have to mention those things out of the code having public, and there is something like documentation too. If you have your code public but no one understand it, how can you say that is open source? Open source means people should have access to it, people should be easily able to change those. Then it should comply those open source licenses, and it's about movement. Okay, we have some popular licenses in open source. Copyleft, Creative Commons, all of you may have seen those logos. One fun point, all of you may have seen that C as the right, and it's actually just opposite reverse of that. So that was copyright and it's copyleft, that is the main difference. So it means freedom to use the work and freedom to study the work, that all those freedom, the free points of the Richard Stallman. And Creative Commons, it's a 4 point of the copyleft movement, and it was to counter the increasingly restrictive permissions. That's about this license. You can see some examples of them too here, like attributions here like etc. We have some examples of copyleft too. Okay, that is the most popular one is GNU General Public License, that is GPL version 3. We also have GPL v2. It said that source code must be made public with any distribution. Modifications must be released under the same license. That means if you have used GPL v3 earlier, then you have to also redistribute it with GPL v3. And it grants rights to use patented material. Some examples you can see here. The operating system, open source softwares that are using this license are Bash, GIMP, all of you may have used those, and using GPL v2 is Linux kernel itself. So Apache license 2.0, it is a source, it says that source code doesn't need to be public upon distribution. Modifications can be released under any license, and similarly we can have some examples of this as Android and Apache softwares. Then the popular one BSD, it have two main version, 2 colors and 3 colors. It says that source code doesn't need to be public upon distribution. And it also says no explicit position on patent uses. The popular example of under BSD are Go language, all of you know that. Then under MIT license, MIT says that source code doesn't need to be public upon distribution, and modification can be released under any license. That is different from the GPL v3 and MIT. You can say that GPL v3 is very restrictive and it is very less restrictive or something like that. Some of the popular MIT license softwares are Angular, Bootstrap, etc. So going beyond the open source softwares, we have talked about the open source softwares. So are there something beyond the open source softwares? Yes, we have OSSW, that means open source hardware too. Actually, open source hardware are those hardwares which are based on open standard of the hardware. All of you may have things like that. For the circuit or for my motherboard, and if I developed one motherboard and if someone else have to repair it, how will he know about that motherboard is actually similar so that he can easily just repair or do some changes on that? So on those circuits or boards, if it's under a same, it is based on a same system, that is a one standard, everyone can understand that, because the same circuit design will be same for every boards, so that everyone can easily change it. So there is a big point in open source hardware. how actually open thing is really required. We can say open source hardware consists of physical artifacts of technology designed and offered by the open design movement. Uh, at the time of, we have talked about during, I think, about 1993, when the Richard Stallman was talking about the free softwares. He was also talking about the free hardwares too. But actually, open source hardware was really great stuff. But at that time, everyone was not able to buy hardware because they really hardware softwares, they were really expensive, so everyone can't buy them. But how one can just distribute them for free, that was really expensive point. So that point is not much popular. Some open source hardware projects are Arduino, Raspberry Pi, OpenPicos, Axiom. I think all of you may have used some other open source hardwares than them, because we may also have your guys from electronics and that background. And I think everyone is using Arduino, Raspberry Pi, etc. And we also have open data, not only open hardware and open source softwares. So what actually open data is? Open data is a data that is openly accessible, exploitable, editable, and shared by anyone for any purposes. Like, if we go just few years back, about around 6 years, there was a big earthquake in Nepal. At that time, there was a really big problem regarding about the data of the how the destruction have really have a effect on the people and all the citizens here in Nepal. So at that time, there was a one company who helped to open that data, so everyone can use the data and they can have really help to the affected peoples. That is how actually open data can be useful. So we can also see some example of old bank open data, so that everyone know what is the currency of USD today, what is the currency of NPR today. So everyone know, because the data of the World Bank is open. And we also have World Health Organization, Open Data Nepal, which really shares the data for the open source uses. But this doesn't mean every data should be open, because we have our own privacy things too. So open data is about the accessible data that can be really useful for everyone. And there is another point beyond the first, that is open knowledge. Open knowledge is knowledge that is free to use, reuse, distribute, say, without legal, social, or technological restriction. So actually, open knowledge organizations and activists have proposed principles and methodologies to say that whether that data is open knowledge or not. Also about the production and the distribution of those. Similarly, as we talked about those free and open source softwares, we do have those licenses. Similarly, there are different licenses for open knowledge, open data too, also for open source hardwares. Then we have some examples of open knowledge that all of you have been using and contributing to Wikipedia, OpenStreetMap, and Science Commons too. We can also say we may also have listen about FOSS and FOSS. FOSS means free and open source software, while FOSS means free and open source hardware. Okay, there are some myths on open source. These are from my perspective, and I think there might be other too, from the different reasons too. Most of the people think that open and free are similar. I have mentioned about that. They are really different. Open source means force only. We have also I have talked about what's beyond the open source softwares in open source. And people think about open source is only for Linux geeks, or for those, open source is only about code too. Because we have about that open source hardware, open data, open knowledge, documentations, etc. Also, people think that contributing open source is too difficult. How can I just contribute to that large Linux kernel or something like that? But that is not real. These are just mice. We will be seeing about the points how one can just get started with those. So I think I don't have to mention this because all of you know that why you should contribute to open source. It's about for making it more free and making it more quality, having it more quality, because you want to have your quality so that people can use your quality. So that's about it. Or you may think like that I will be just cloning some project and changing that and using that. That's why you have to contribute that too. So if you are loving that, surely someone else will also be loving. Also, contributing to that and making it publicly available will really help you share your skills, because in the early days in the computer history there was really problem regarding some people were really forward in the technology and some are really back. That is somehow today too, but due of the open source it has just been reduced a bit, and we can also get much deeper knowledge while contributing to the projects or open source and free stuffs. Also we can build our reputation, and it will help grow our career. The fun point here is a fun point. It's about personal satisfaction too. We have Linus Torvald who really wants to have some comments every day on his kernel and other open source softwares. And also we don't know, someone may be seeing over us and over our contributions too. That is how open source is really required to us, why we have to contribute to them. So it's about someone who is really new to the open source, how one can start contributing. So everyone have to first research and go for and choose a project. Sir, thank you. You can get those slides. I'll just share on our Telegram community of our. That's, if you have any questions, I can just take them. You have some places here where you can get to know more about this. Okay, thank you everyone for listening and giving me opportunity to share about those things. Because we really need to share these things today too, because someone may forget this. So I just bring those things here. If you have any questions, you can have.